We picture Rome falling to a barbarian horde, overwhelmed, outmatched, a civilization simply outpowered. That's the story we tell ourselves. But Adrianople wasn't really a military defeat. It was an institutional autopsy. And the thing that actually killed Rome wasn't the Gothic cavalry. It was a currency so debased the empire could barely pay its own legions. Borders so hollow that Rome settled armed outsiders inside them, then starved them. An emperor who marched into a valley without reconnaissance because waiting for reinforcements looked weaker than gambling everything. By 378, none of the warning signs were abstract anymore. They were physical. Coins that literally flake silver in your hand. Armed refugees sitting on Roman soil after being betrayed by governors who invited them in. Frontier forts still existed on paper, laws still written, walls still standing, but nobody left to man them. Valens didn't lose a battle. He lost a civilization's last illusion. Because empires usually aren't destroyed from the outside. They hollow themselves out first, and then, eventually, the last group through the gates just gives the final push. And if you understand why Valens rode into that valley, you start noticing the same march happening now. August 9th, 378 AD. A Roman emperor leads roughly 2/3 of the Eastern Roman army into a valley outside Adrianople. And that's in modern-day Turkey. What he doesn't wait for is Western reinforcements already marching towards him. He doesn't properly scout the terrain. He has no clear idea where the Gothic cavalry actually is. By sunset, he's dead. His body is never recovered. 2/3 of the army are gone with him. Not defeated, really. More accurately, erased. And this isn't ultimately a story about a battle. It's a story about what has to break inside a civilization before a disaster like that even becomes possible. Because Adrianople isn't some military accident sitting alone in history. It's an autopsy report. And if you want to understand why Rome could never fully defend itself again after this afternoon, you have to look at what was already dead long before the first sword was drawn. Let's start with money, because money is usually where the autopsy begins. By 378 AD, the Roman economy had been slowly cannibalizing itself for more than a century. The denarius, which had once been the backbone of the Roman commerce, went from roughly 95% pure silver under Augustus to less than 5%. The Antoninianus, introduced as essentially a double denarius, had become a copper coin with a silver wash over it. You could literally rub the coating off with your thumb. And the Romans understood this. They weren't confused about what was actually happening. They could see their currency deteriorating in real time. They could feel it. So they reacted the way people usually do when money stops holding value. They hoarded the older coins that still contained silver. They moved forward with barter. Black markets formed because nobody trusted the official currency to buy tomorrow what it bought today. And that's where this starts affecting the army. Because Rome's military problem by the late 4th century isn't really a manpower issue. It's a payroll issue. Legionaries had to be paid. Actually, more accurately, they expected to be paid. And the Roman state increasingly couldn't produce honest money to do it. Diocletian tried to fix this back in the 280s, a new coinage system. Price controls. The Edict of Maximum Prices made it a capital offense to charge above state-mandated rates. It failed. Price controls always fail because they don't create supply. They destroy the signal that tells producers what's worth producing in the first place. So merchants stopped selling goods at official prices. The state responded with coercion. The economy responded by disappearing into the shadows. By the time Valens becomes emperor, the Eastern Roman government is funding its military through land taxes, forced requisitions, and a currency almost nobody trusts. That's the real background condition here. The army still exists. It still marches. It still wears Roman uniforms. But the financial structure underneath it is rotting. And once that happens, it changes everything about how the state fights wars, who enlists, how long campaigns can last, whether you can afford delay, or whether you have to force a confrontation immediately, because the treasury can't sustain another month in the field. So when Valens refuses to wait for Gratians and reinforcements, that's not just ego. That's not even impatience. It's the fiscal logic of a state running out of room. Every extra day in the field costs money the empire doesn't reliably have anymore. The currency crisis didn't directly cause Adrianople. It created the conditions that made Adrianople inevitable. And this is what the systematic failure usually looks like. It doesn't explode the building all at once. It removes the load-bearing walls quietly and waits for pressure. Same pattern, different century. When governments print currency to fund obligations they can't realistically sustain, they don't create wealth. They create the appearance of solvency, while the real economy slowly disengages underneath them. The Roman army in 378 was still wearing the uniform. It just couldn't afford the war. Now look at the borders. Because the Gothic army that destroys Valens didn't invade Rome. Rome invited them in. And the part that always gets left out of the Hollywood version of this story, the Goths weren't standing outside the gates trying to batter them down. They had already been inside because Rome itself put them there. In 376, 2 years before Adrianople, the Huns swept across the Etruscan steppe and pushed the Gothic Thervings and Gertings through the south towards the Danube frontier. Suddenly Rome is facing hundreds of thousands of refugees, hungry, armed, desperate. And the Roman governor of Thrace, Lupicinius, sees opportunity, not danger, opportunity. Rome needed soldiers. Recruitment was declining. Border manpower was thin. And now there were thousands of fighting-age men willing to serve if Rome let them cross the river. So Lupicinius opens the crossing. The Goths enter Roman territory as foederati, allied military settlers placed on Roman land in exchange for service. Now this policy itself wasn't new. Rome had been integrating Germanic tribes into border defense systems for generations. The difference in 376 was scale and corruption, because Lupicinius doesn't simply let them in, he exploits them. He disarms them at crossing points, then sells them food at famine prices. At one point, Roman officials are reportedly trading dogs in exchange for Gothic children, who are then sold into slavery. Rome takes their weapons and starves them. And this actually matters because it shows the border system wasn't malfunctioning by accident. It was functioning exactly as the people running it intended it to function, as a revenue mechanism. The Gothic leaders, including Fritigern, protest. Lupicinius invites them to a banquet at Marcellinus, and then apparently attempts to assassinate them all there. Fritigern escapes. The revolt begins. And the mechanism underneath all of this is really important. By 376, Rome's border system isn't a wall anymore. It's a membrane. It doesn't truly keep populations out, it filters them. And the filter itself is becoming corrupted. Crossing points designed to regulate migration become checkpoints for extraction. Officials turn a humanitarian crisis into a business model. Refugees become inventory. The borders don't fail because barbarians are overwhelmingly strong. They fail because the institutions managing them have already stopped performing their intended function. The laws still exist. The forts still exist. The offices still exist. But the system itself no longer works in reality. And once Fritigern realizes Rome isn't offering protection at all, it's offering exploitation. The Goths respond the way armed populations usually respond when the authority governing them becomes predatory. They go to war against it. This is the border pattern. You can write as many laws as you want. You can build checkpoints, barriers, bureaucracies. But when the people administering the system stop serving its actual purpose and start serving themselves instead, the border becomes fiction. A line on a map with no corresponding reality underneath it. Same migration crisis. Same institutional decay. Same widening gap between the law says and what the system actually does. Same pattern, different century. Now look at power, because the question most people ask about Adrianople is actually the wrong one. Why didn't Valens wait? Gratian, the Western emperor, is already marching east with reinforcements. Messages have been sent telling Valens to hold position. Together, the Roman forces would likely outnumber the Goths significantly. Instead, Valens attacks early. He marches his men 8 miles through the August heat, deploys into terrain he hasn't properly scouted, engages an enemy whose full strength he doesn't understand. Why? The standard explanation is hubris. Valens was arrogant, jealous of Gratian's victories, impatient. And honestly, that's probably true, to a point. But it's not the mechanism. Hubris is personality. The mechanism is institutional. Valens governs the Eastern Empire. Gratian governs the West. Both are Augusti under the Diocletian system, technically equals. But the Roman imperial structure was never fully built for equality. It needed a dominant figure capable of resolving disputes through authority. By 378, that figure no longer exists. Valens is older. He's ruled longer. But Gratian's generals have recently defeated the Alemanni in the West. And military victory in late Rome is the only real source of legitimacy left. Not the Senate, not tradition, not law. Victory. The man who wins battles controls the loyalty of the army. The man who controls the army remains emperor. Valens knows this because every emperor since the 3rd century has lived under the same pressure. 25, 30 emperors in roughly 50 years. Many murdered by their own troops. Valens has already survived 14 years, which by late Roman standards is practically stability. But his position is never secure. It depends entirely on appearing capable. Waiting for Gratian would mean publicly admitting the Gothic crisis inside Valens' own territory required Western intervention. And inside the Roman power structure, that's not merely embarrassing, it's dangerous. That's the kind of signal that makes generals begin calculating alternatives. Because in Rome, weakness isn't temporary. Weakness invites replacement. The Praetorian pattern had taught emperors one lesson over and over again. The moment the army stops believing you can lead, you are already dead. An emperor without military loyalty isn't a weak ruler. He's a future corpse. So Valens marches into the valley not because he's irrational, but because the system surrounding him has eliminated safe options. He can wait and appear weak, risking usurpation, or he can attack and at least preserve the appearance of strength. That's the real pattern here. When political systems make looking strong more important than actually being strong, you get Adrianople. Every single time. The system didn't merely fail to stop a bad decision. It turned the bad decision into a rational one. Same pattern, different century. So here's what actually happens on the battlefield. Valens marches from Adrianople toward the Gothic camp, roughly 8 miles away. The heat is brutal. His men have been moving since dawn with little rest and almost no water. The Gothic wagons are arranged into a defensive circle on the elevated ground. Fritigern sends negotiators forward, mostly to buy time, because he knows his cavalry is still away foraging in the hills. Without them, the Goths probably lose a pitched engagement. Valens deploys anyway, and the Roman line is still forming when contact begins. The right wing attacks prematurely before the rest of the army is fully organized. Initially, they actually put the Gothic forces back towards their wagons. Then the cavalry returns from foraging. It comes out of the hills onto both Roman flanks almost simultaneously. A double envelopment, essentially the same maneuver Hannibal used at Cannae centuries earlier. Rome had seen this before, but now they can't respond. The Roman formation compresses into itself, too crowded to maneuver, too surrounded to retreat effectively. Heat, exhaustion, poor deployment. Tactically, these are failures. But the reason the army cannot recover from these failures is structural. This is no longer the legionary system of Scipio Africanus. The late Roman army is thinner, more stretched, part Roman, part Federate, underpaid, unevenly equipped. It lacks the institutional depth necessary to absorb mistakes and continue functioning. Healthy militaries survive bad days. Adrianople becomes catastrophic because the Roman military machine is already operating at the absolute edge of what the border system can sustain. Valens dies somewhere in the fighting. Accounts differ. One says an arrow strikes him. Another claims he retreats into a farmhouse, later burned by Gothic forces. Nobody really knows. His body is never conclusively identified. Now, emperors dying in battle or captivity wasn't unheard of. A few decades earlier, Valerian had been captured alive by the Persians, and Rome sincerely declared another emperor. But Adrianople is different, because this time the army dies too. Roughly 2/3 of the Eastern Field Army, the mobile force defending the Balkan frontier, disappears in a single afternoon. This isn't a border skirmish. It's Rome losing its immune system, and the empire never truly rebuilt it, especially not in the West, because the army destroyed at Adrianople was the product of generations of institutional accumulation. Financial systems, recruitment systems, command structures, loyalty structures, all already deteriorating before the battle actually begins. You can't replace that overnight with conscription. You can't restore it through decrees, because the system that originally produced it had already stopped functioning. So the loss isn't merely manpower, it's organizational memory, veteran leadership, the practical knowledge of how a professional military actually operates. Gone in one afternoon. And after Adrianople, Rome technically survives. That's the detail that confuses people. The Western Empire lasts almost another century, 98 years technically. But everything after Adrianople feels like managed decline. The Romans themselves understood this even if they didn't phrase it that way. Post-Adrianople strategy becomes defensive everywhere. No more major offensives. No more real expansion. Fortify cities. Shorten defensive lines. Hire more mercenaries. Settle more barbarian groups inside the empire to defend the borders. The exact policy that helped to create the Gothic crisis in the first place. The empire turns into a long series of withdrawals disguised as continuity. And that's the pattern that actually matters here. Not collapse. Fade. Empires rarely end in one dramatic moment. Usually they enter a prolonged negotiation with their own diminishing capacity. They keep the system symbols, the institutions, the titles, the flags. But the underlying function is gone. Rome continues calling itself Rome long after no one can really reliably defend its own territory. The Senate still meets. Consuls are still elected. Coins are still stamped. But none of those things mean what they used to mean. And that's really the autopsy finding here. Adrianople doesn't cause the decline. It marks the point where the decline becomes irreversible, because the three systems a civilization needs for recovery, money, borders, and legitimate power, have already been compromised before the first Gothic rider appeared over the hill. Money had been debased beyond trust. Borders were administered by officials profiting from the crisis they were supposed to solve. Power belonged to leaders who couldn't afford to appear weak, even when the restraint was strategically correct. Adrianople is what happens when all three fault lines slip simultaneously. The battlefield disaster is the symptom. Institutional decay is the disease. And this isn't uniquely Roman. It's a pattern. So here's the real question. If you understand what happened at Adrianople, not just the battle itself, but the systemic failure underneath it, can you see the same mechanisms operating now? Because I can. A currency that steadily loses purchasing power while governments insist inflation is under control. Borders that exist legally, but increasingly not operating. Where enforcement systems are overwhelmed, hollowed out, or even in some cases actively benefiting from dysfunction. Political leaders who can't afford to appear weak, even when patience is the correct strategy, because the systems surrounding them reward theatrical strength and punish honesty. These aren't really analogies. They're the same mechanisms wearing different labels. Money, borders, power. The three load-bearing walls. And when those walls begin failing, the structure doesn't collapse immediately. That's the dangerous part. It keeps standing there, looking normal, until the pressure arrives. Rome is falling right now. You're just watching the replay. This has been The Roman Pattern. I'm Jeremy Ryan Slate. Be sure to like this video, leave us a comment, and smash the subscribe button if you want more of The Roman Pattern.